everyone. I'm Leanne West, and I'm the president of the International Children's Advisory Network. And I want to welcome you today to Ask the Experts, where sometimes the experts are clinicians and sometimes the experts are our youth members.
So thank you for joining us today at iCAN's Ask the Experts with Dr. Anthony Chang. Today we're going to focus on ethics and what that means to be as a patient, as a provider, and someone in the community towards pediatric healthcare and clinical research. So feel free, any question you want to ask today, you can go ahead and ask out loud, just unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat and then I'll read it out loud. But either way, we are so glad to have you and glad that you're able to give up an hour of your time and join us. So Dr. Chang, I'll turn it over to you. Do you want to talk a little bit about ethics to set the stage?
Wow, it's not an easy subject on a Saturday morning, but I'll do the best I can. So ethics is basically for clinicians, for doctors and nurses, is basically doing the right thing for your patient in medicine. And obviously that could be defined differently for everybody, but it's doing the right thing as agreed upon by most of the people that practice. So if, for example, if you think ending a life just because you don't want to see someone suffer by injecting them with potassium, to you, it may be the right thing to do, but not to the community of doctors and nurses. So the important thing is something that is the right thing for the community of doctors and nurses and other healthcare professionals that they would agree with. Any questions? Any questions about that? Or it's a difficult topic, but it's a very important topic that we understand.
Maybe there's a situation we could talk about to kind of help get some questions going. I think last week or last month, we talked a little bit about COVID. And maybe right now the discussion could be about vaccines. Are they ethical? You know, is that something that everybody should have? You know, does that seem right if there's religious beliefs against that? Maybe we could kind of go a little deeper into that area.
Well, that's a very difficult one because there are religions that do not believe in vaccines. There are, as we all aware, political affiliations that make us not necessarily believe in the vaccines, as well as just personal beliefs that vaccines may cause side effects and that the effects of the virus is deemed to be less. But as we know, the evidence isn't showing us that this is just a regular flu that anyone and most people can get over. This is a far deadlier virus. So then the ethical discussion is, you know, should everyone get vaccinated to protect each other? And what's the ethics of that? And that's been a very difficult discussion. There's a balance between individual freedom and then your responsibility to the society, right? So, and similar debates have gone on for things like seatbelts and helmets when you're riding a motorcycle. Yes, you have your individual freedom, but if something happened, then you're a burden to society. And in this case, it's even worse because the burden is actually for other people as well, not just you. Now you can get sick, survive or not survive, but by not getting vaccinated, you're more likely than not to still infect other people with the virus that you might have. It looks like you're more likely to get infected if you don't have a vaccine. And the counter is true too, that if you got the vaccine, it looks like you're less likely to get infected. It looks like the evidence is pointing that way. So that means if you get the vaccine, it's several benefits, right? Not only are you going to be protecting yourself so that in the event that you get the infection first of all, the virus probably doesn't hang around too long because you got vaccinated and your immune response is kicking in to fight off the virus. And you're not likely to get seriously sick, land in the ICU, or even die. But the other benefit is that since you're not likely to stay infected for very long, then your ability to infect other people is less too. So it's a kind of a double benefit from the vaccination. But ultimately, this country is about freedom. So it's hard to make Americans do anything, as you know, even a mask. You think a mask is relatively non-invasive. It's uncomfortable, but it's not too big a deal. And without any side effects, really, unless you have a disease like asthma and you feel like you have less ability to breathe very well. I can see that. And there's definitely a psychological component to that too. But short of something like that, there's really no side effect. And you can see the tremendous controversy that's generated. And I think partly because in the US, I don't know if we have anyone from abroad, but in the US, we really value our personal freedom. But the really ethical discussion is, how do you put your personal freedom in balance with your responsibility to society? Like if you have COVID right now, do you have the right to go around not wearing a mask and infect other people? You probably, in my opinion, you don't have that right. You cannot wear a mask inside your house or in your local community or family even, but you should not be out there, especially if you're positive, not wearing a mask.
Yeah, I think those are really interesting questions and probably help to spark a bigger thought process about this. What about ethics in clinical research? So as a participant, how do we know that the clinical research that's designed for us is safe? And how do we know that we have the freedom of choice? Can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a good question too. There are principles of ethics in research, like, you have to have true informed consent so that you have all the information you need to freely decide. And that's the important word there, freely decide. You don't, you shouldn't have the doctor talk to you about the study like, well, if you do the study, I'm going to be happier with you as a patient. There's some coercion there sometimes, but we should just say, here's the study. I'm trying to improve patient care and patient outcome. You're free to choose if you want to be part of it. I can just tell you from my personal experience doing research, I would say 95% of the parents are totally willing to help with the research effort, which astounds me because occasionally the research project that does have a few risks, but even those projects, I try to be very open and try to be very give the information in such a way that they can decide. And I'm always pleasantly surprised that so many parents are willing to help, even when it's not obvious that it's going to help their own children. They're willing to help.
I have a quick question. So for ethical research, I know in the past there was a lot where, there's these significant findings that we found with research that today we'd consider unethical. So in today's day and age, how do you think scientists find that balance between still gaining significant results, but also maintaining their ethics at the same time?
Yeah, I think ethics come first ahead of any possible knowledge or insight to help patients even, because if you violate, it's like ethics and personal integrity with your patient is like what we call Latin is called prima facie, or first layer, first standard. And then you can't violate that because otherwise everything else you can do, right? So you have to protect that first priority, which is your integrity and your patient, ethics with your patient. Because even if you were to make like a Nobel-winning discovery, you violated that integrity with you and your patient, and that's just violating ethics, basically. So it's nothing is worth that first responsibility to your patient. Do no harm, right, in the Hippocratic Oath. So, but I think one of the best things we can do right now is to learn a little bit more about how clinicians can use data more intelligently. And by that, I mean using artificial intelligence and look at, the data information from patients, because there's so much information there that we're not using. And we always think, or traditionally, we've always thought using, what they call randomized controlled trials or clinical research to get to the answer of some drug effect. But in fact, there's some patients and doctors use the drug, and other patients and doctors prefer not to use the drug. So you kind of have already a trial without even designing a trial. And we just need to get better at using data and information that's already out there that doesn't, mandate a clinical trial that you set up so that you have to think about ethics, because people freely choose medical therapy all the time. Unless it's a brand new drug, then you can still say, then you can set up a trial. But I think there's a lot of information out there that we're not using. So we're kind of forced to set up a trial because we don't know the answer. And in fact, we should just look at the data a little bit more intelligently without putting patients at risk. And then the other really fascinating area now that I'm involved in also is, have you guys heard of the digital twin or virtual twin concept? It's really cool. It's so you kind of borrow the technology from industry, like car manufacturing. And I'm not saying people are like cars, but I'm just saying the principle or the technology of you have a physically you have a car, and then what the car manufacturers are doing now is to duplicate the car digitally in the computer. So you have all the information about the car in the computer in terms of the parts, the endurance of some of the materials, how the materials function together. And then you can essentially have the virtual car run for like 100,000 miles and see what wears out without putting, in the old days, the car would be in the garage at 100,000 miles, and several days later, then you kind of know what's wearing out, or several weeks, I should say. But now with virtually, you can create that car in the computer, and then you can actually figure out how a car would do in 100,000 miles, just like virtually running that car for 100,000 miles. So imagine that concept of basically, that's why the name virtual twin is kind of cool, because it's your twin. So people have done creating you as a patient per se, and then basically duplicate you in the computer, your disease or your therapy or how your disease is coming along, and then just see and predict what's going to happen in the future. So that's an amazing contribution, because then you potentially don't have to do clinical trials. You can just, try a new therapy and see how that patient's going to do without actually subjecting that patient to a clinical trial. So you can see the side effects, you can see the effects of the therapy, if it's worth the risk or not. So it sounds a little bit like science fiction, but people are starting to do okay with that in terms of getting results. So this decade is going to be very important to see how far we can carry that. But I'm a cardiologist, and it's particularly good with cardiology patients because we do things like different kinds of pacemakers, and a lot of times we don't really know ahead of time how it's going to work out with the patient. But now with a virtual twin or virtual heart of your patient, you can actually try these therapies like a pacemaker or, for heart failure, and you can actually see how the heart's going to do based on the heart's sort of, conditions that are real life. You just kind of duplicating that in the computer with software, and then you can kind of see how the patients will do. So it's a fascinating area. It's a great use of, if you think about it, it's the coming together of extended reality. You probably have heard of augmented or virtual reality, and artificial intelligence in a way. Yeah, I think if those of you who are going into, are you guys thinking about medicine as a career? Or, yeah, I'm almost envious that you're gonna have such an amazing 25 to 50 years of things that make you so glad that you're in this area. I mean, I'm always passionate about medicine, but I'm hoping that I'll live long enough to see some of the things I'm talking about right now. So yeah, so in other words, in the future, you may not need to do any clinical trials. You just, here's Claire in real life, and here's the twin of Claire in the computer. And let's see in 20 years, in terms of your health, what should we worry about more than anything else based on your family history, your labs, your checkup so far, and just kind of project ahead of time what Claire in 20 years is going to be like. If you have diabetes, we can do the same. If you have heart disease, we can do the same. So yeah, it's a very exciting time. And you can probably, yeah, you can even do it in your office. Your doctor can probably do it in his or her office and say, this is what Amy's diabetes is going to look like 20 years from now, unless you make these changes, then show you again what you're going to be like in 20 years if you did these things. So I think talk about changing behavior. That's a great way to change behavior. If you can kind of like have a crystal ball and see how you're going to do with your diabetes 20 years from now, depending on what you do. And I think that's pretty motivating for most people. Then more motivating than getting a pamphlet talking about diabetes, so.
Yeah, I agree too. I think that's really fascinating. Shrija just had to go to an SAT, so she is.
Oh, have fun. Taking the SAT or studying?
I think she was doing a practice one this morning, so she had shared that earlier, and then she was hoping to stay on a few more minutes, but parents called and said it's time to go, so she had to go.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
I don't miss those days.
No, me neither. So that was a really great point. And I think the thought that occurred to me, and this really isn't necessarily an ethical consideration, although I guess it could be, in the news recently, there was talk about the iPhone 12 and pacemakers. And do companies outside of, medical fields have an ethical responsibility to design products and include medical researchers into their study design to ensure that there's not a problem down the road? So like the magnets in the phone, does that really implicate the pacemaker? And is there an ethical need to cross-reference different groups?
Oh, I missed that piece of you. Was it that the phone affects pacemakers? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it does somehow. But, I think when they produced the phone, they didn't necessarily include anyone from the scientific community to see if there was an effect with patients. And it brings up an interesting point for all devices. It happens to be focused on pacemakers, but it could be other patient medical device that is being used. And should there be like a cross-reference?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's maybe something that they just didn't think about. I can't imagine they didn't think about that, but maybe just thought about, but didn't care as much as they should have, but there are a lot of people with pacemakers. I'm estimating probably 1 million or so Americans with pacemakers. So I'm a little surprised that they wouldn't want to take that into account. I'm guessing probably 500,000 to 1 million pacemakers in the country, in the US alone. So that's just not a good business decision either to think about, not to mention the liability, right? It's the not getting the business that they normally would have, but also the liability if someone with a pacemaker borrowed the phone, or something like that. So that was not a smart business decision not to include that in the discussion, because they usually do. They usually factor that in. So I'm a little bit surprised. Has anything actually happened?
I don't think so. I know that they replicated in a lab the effect of the magnet directly placed on the pacemaker. I don't know if that could be replicated in a human person, or if that was just a lab study. But it was on the news, and so I thought, oh, this is interesting for our conversation. Like, how far do you go? And as future scientists, should your circle be wider than what you might think of when you're developing and creating new product design?
Yeah, 1.5 million, by the way, I just looked it up. 1.5.
That's a lot of people.
Sometimes it's fun to guess and see how close you are, but 1.5 million Americans have a pacemaker, which is 500,000 more than I expected. And only another million worldwide. So we clearly have a lot of Americans with pacemakers, but not too many people abroad with pacemakers. I'm not sure what that is. There's so many countries that can afford it. So perhaps, what would you guys think if you get those numbers? 1.5 million Americans have pacemakers, and only it says 1 million. Oh, I see. 1 million worldwide get a pacemaker. Yeah, so that's different. But still, seems like Americans are getting more pacemakers than anyone else. So what do you think about that if someone said that to you? How would you ask questions about why there's such a big discrepancy?
I think it's
two possibilities, right? Two main possibilities. Okay, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that I think it sparks the question of other factors like economics, like how, and also like awareness of issues. Because I feel like living in America, we obviously have, like with our education system and things like that, we have a lot more resources that we could use to find out about issues, and also like government aid and stuff to get help that we need. But I'm not too sure that in other countries, like they might not have that awareness, first of all. So I think it just goes to show that we need to obviously like be more, like spread more awareness about issues too.
Yeah. So maybe it's an educational or awareness, but there are a lot of cardiologists abroad who know about pacemakers. So what do you think is also another possibility? If there's such a asymmetry or imbalance of numbers of Americans with pacemakers and then people abroad.
The first thing I thought of was the American lifestyle, and if that maybe had an impact on the numbers that we're seeing. But I think also the economics between people who can afford pacemakers in America and probably other countries that can't afford them.
Yeah. The other thing I would wonder is maybe we have less healthy Americans that end up with heart failure and pacemakers and heart attacks. But also maybe the cardiologists here are over prescribing that therapy. That's always possible too. Maybe we have different indications with pacemakers. Maybe we're overly aggressive putting pacemakers in fear of maybe liability, or, sometimes it's not that the doctors are greedy and they want to make money off the pacemakers. It's just that maybe they feel like they're liable if even there's 1% chance of sudden death and they don't put in a pacemaker. I think the real world situation is, as you'll learn, is always all of the above. Probably less awareness of, different indications abroad, and more aggressive here and fear of liability, and to create that imbalance, right? So it's always good to think about all the possibilities, because in the real world, a lot of times it is all the possibilities that you're thinking of.
And that's a great ethical situation right there. Is it right for a doctor to put in a pacemaker when there might be a 1% chance? Do the benefits outweigh the necessary risk of having that procedure done? And what are the risks of that procedure? Like, I think this is a really fascinating topic.
Yeah, these questions are getting tougher all the time throughout the morning. It is so difficult. I personally have a personal way of deciding about ethics if I haven't a situation like that where it's really hard to decide. I usually try to remember to treat every patient and family like it's my relative or my own family. You'd be amazed how like you come up with clarity when you have that. Like, okay, if this were my father or my child, what would I recommend? And it gets very personal sometimes if you kind of feel that way, but I think that's good that you feel like your patient and your families are like your relatives. Then you kind of kick it up a notch in terms of how you think about these things, and not treat patients and families like, patients and families. Most doctors are pretty dedicated, but I think you should treat your patients and families like their real relatives or immediate family, because then it makes the decision sometimes much harder, but the clarity is going to be there, and you can sleep better at night realizing that you did the best you could under the circumstances. And sometimes it's just good, like I'm dealing with a lot of patients, young patients particularly, who had COVID, and now they're seeking my care as a cardiologist. And there's some controversies even among the practitioners. Should the patients be on lifelong aspirin or not? Like they had a heart attack, should they be on some medications for their heart? I've done a lot of research in heart failure to know that you need to be proactive, and you actually start a medication even if there's no sign of heart failure. You need to be proactive. But I'm in a minority of cardiologists that would recommend that. So how far do I push if another cardiologist colleague is not recommending it? I'm pretty convinced it's the better strategy, but there's no clinical trial in COVID because it's so new. So how far do I push that? So what I usually do is I give the flexibility to the patients and the families. I'll state my case. I've studied heart failure at great length. I even have written 3 books on heart failure, and this is what I would recommend. But I'm in the minority, and you feel free to research this on your own, or ask other opinions. And I give the families the option to choose. And I don't get personally, offended if they choose to listen to the majority of cardiologists, and some people do. But you'd be amazed if you kind of give that decision back to the family that they deserve, you'd be amazed how many people will actually think that was very generous of you to do that, and they actually will follow your recommendation. And the same for second opinions too. I'm always saying, listen, I'm not sure about this. This is what my educated, guess is going to be. Feel free to seek a second or third opinion. But if you do that, let me know, because I will handpick for you the 2 or 3 other opinions that I would value more than others, because I'm pretty well connected, especially in Southern California. I wouldn't want them to seek a second opinion of someone that I don't think is, seasoned enough to make an opinion. So I would, sometimes give them 2 or 3 names. And it's like the recommendation thing. Once you say, I'm comfortable with my relationship with you and my perception of myself and confidence in myself, that I'm, okay with you looking for other people for an opinion, and then we can talk about it. A lot of times they don't even bother to get a second opinion, which I find a little bit surprising. I offer it to them, but they don't take it, because I think part of the interaction here is that if a doctor is willing to be fallible and say, I don't know everything that's happening, but this is what I would do if you were my family, this is what I would recommend. I think they trust that. They know that you're not saying you're a know-it-all and you know what the right answer is. You're showing them your human fallibility, or you're willing to be working with them to make a decision, rather than, doctors, especially cardiologists and surgeons, have this reputation of being paternalistic. Like, we'll tell you what to do and you just need to follow it. I'm almost never like that, unless there's something major issue going on. I feel like, I think the evidence, in my opinion, is pointing to a better result if you go on lifelong aspirin, but it's a new disease. I don't know how it's going to be, but I will recommend it. And then they trust that you don't pretend that you know more than you do. I think that that's a tremendous relief to families that, yes, you have a good reputation and you're even known around the world to some degree, but you don't have so much hubris or pride that you won't consider other options of therapy, right? And if a patient decides against taking the aspirin, let's say, I don't get personally insulted or feel like they're not listening to my recommendation. I just feel like they should have the final say in most instances. So, but you find the patients and families are much more collaborative if you give them part of the decision too, which you should.
I think that's a really good point. I really liked how you talked about how doctors might communicate with other doctors and bring that back to the patient. And I actually had a similar thing happen to me a little bit ago where the doctor said, you know what, we don't know. We're going to take this case and bring it to their medical board and talk about solutions and different ways that we might be able to treat it, which I think that's super awesome. And that direct talking to the patient is really important.
Yeah. I created something that's kind of fun. I call it the I clinic, not this I, but the letter I clinic. And the I, kind of like the I in iCAN, it stands for something, right? So the I stands for innovative and intelligent. So we basically have kind of nerdy doctors that are very super curious. And we have about 5 to 10. And we started this I clinic. And we bring the patients that are kind of puzzling us or complicated and we can't figure out what the diagnosis is, or the management is very difficult and therapy is very challenging, and just say, hey, let's get 5 to 10 more smart doctors on board with your care and let's see if we can together figure it out. Now, some doctors say, well, I'm not going to do that because that demonstrates to the parents that I don't know enough to figure it out on my own, right? It's a natural human feeling. I think it's the opposite. Once I do that, the parents are, first of all, they're so appreciative. They're like, oh, Dr. Chang, that's great. I can't, I'm so happy that you're thinking about presenting, Sarah to 5 to 10 other doctors of different subspecialties, not 5 to 10 different cardiologists, because then we'll never agree on anything. But these are 5 different, other kinds of doctors like neurologist or surgeon or hematologist, because I do feel like there's something called the Medici Effect, Medici. It's from the Renaissance, right? The Renaissance in Italian history was very successful because they kind of brought together all kinds of people in the sciences and the arts and create this wonderful alchemy of experts in everything to come up with amazing ideas, right? And I kind of had that, if I call them the Medici Clinic, people wouldn't know what that's about. But I thought if you bring innovative and intelligent clinicians with new ideas, let's put them all together in the same room. And it's amazing how the discussions go in terms of just thinking on the possibilities. Because everyone, the saying is, everyone in the room is always smarter than the smartest person in the room, which I think is totally, totally true. And then the other thing is, well, a lot of times these patients with difficult diagnoses have already seen, 5 to 10 subspecialists anyway, and they all have their notes in the electronic record. But guess what? No one's going to read all 10 subspecialist opinions and letters, even though they all know they're there. And I certainly don't have that kind of time. So I feel like if all 10 subspecialists, 5 to 10 subspecialists come together and talk and communicate together at the same time, real time, then the discussion is much more different than each subspecialist, rendering their own opinion and put it in the electronic record. So unfortunately, up to now, there's no clever way for us to electronically link all these letters and figure out, how to combine everyone's opinions. And even if you did that, it's still, there's a difference between 5 separate opinions and 5 doctors coming together and discuss the case together. It's like, one is additive, 5 opinions, you add it together, is 5. You know, 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 5. But if you have 5 doctors together and they talk together, I think it's like 25 because it's 5 times 5, not 5, you know, 5 ones basically. Because one doctor will say something that will make me, and this is exactly what happened. One doctor said something that made me think of something that I've seen before. And then all of a sudden my discussion and my thinking is, you know, influenced by that doctor's comment that I normally would not be thinking if I were by myself. So, you know, doctors practice by themselves 99.9% of the time, other than having a conference or something. But why can't we benefit from everyone's, you know, wisdom and intelligence and innovation, you know, with patients, you know, that are particularly challenging. So, and I think people who, I have to say a few clinicians saying, oh, this iClinic thing, I'm not sure. And I always say, why don't you just come to one and see? And once they come, they don't want to leave. They're like, make sure I get invited next time, because it's just kind of fun, you know, to talk about a patient that is challenging. Well, you can imagine the inspirations there, right? Because one, you're helping a family by making your contribution and what you think. 2, it satisfies your curiosity, right? Because doctors love solving puzzles, right? Like a patient that no one can figure out. Well, that gets our attention, right? Because you want to be the first one to see if you can figure it out. And then also 3, the third benefit is working with other doctors that are smart and curious. You know, we rarely have that opportunity. We practice in silos all the time. So by proving that there's benefit to the patient, by satisfying your own individual curiosity, and, you know, playing detective in a way. And the third thing is working with your colleagues that are smart and intelligent and learn from those doctors. So yeah, once a doctor comes, they say, oh, make sure I'm invited next time. This was kind of fun. And we make it fun too. You know, we make it like, this is not making fun of the patients, obviously, but we make it so that's very enjoyable. You know, have a lively discussion about, you know, what to do next with the patient, and every patient benefited. And the most important thing is, the families that I nominate to be in that clinic are so grateful that 5 more doctors are going to look in on the case and think about it. They never say, well, Dr. Chang, you know, we wish that you would have known this on your own. You know, no one's ever said that. They say, wow, it's amazing that you're taking the effort to, making the effort to discuss, you know, our son or daughter with other doctors because you cared that much, and which is absolutely true. I care that much, like your family. If I had a family member with disease, well, actually I do, I talk to 5 to 10 other doctors. I don't want my own opinion. I want to talk to other doctors. And the benefit of a lot of doctors talking together is amazing. Especially when a patient has multi-system, you know, disease or diagnosis that no one can figure out. It's just helpful to have 5 different. Remember, all the subspecialties in pediatrics, we're all boarded or have been boarded in pediatrics too. So we're all pediatricians in a way, you know, so that's the beauty, is we have a common, you know, ground. And we can all, just because you're a cardiologist, that doesn't mean you can't make a diagnosis of a skin lesion, right? You can, maybe you saw something at one point that you remember to this day and make the diagnosis. So we really value all the doctors coming together. Yeah, ideally, I see the comment. Yeah, ideally, we should have that clinic more often with more patients for sure. And that's what we're doing, trying to develop this model into, and maybe that's something we can share with iCAN and iSpy in the future meeting, is how great that is. And that's almost never used as a concept. So hopefully the iClinic will continue on and will present that data. And the first few patients that we have done, everyone agreed that it was good to come together and discuss the patient. And more importantly, it resulted in a different diagnostic or treatment plan. It shifted the care. That's the important thing. It's not only was it fun to discuss a challenging patient, but we also had actionable plans that were different than the way the patient care was going before. So it was sort of a triple win, you know, for the family, for the patient, and for the doctors, you know. So I think it really, really was good. But unless you go through one of those clinics, you kind of understand the concept of something like an eye clinic, but you don't appreciate the magnitude of the dividend or the benefit until you've experienced the clinic yourself. And plus you learn, all the doctors learn from those case discussions. Something that I learned, I mean, I've been in practice for 33 years, 34 years. I learned a lot from those clinics because there are other subspecialists that had different perspectives that I don't have access to, on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I think that's really, really cool. And that's definitely something iCAN would love to learn more and share more about, because I think where it sounds like this is headed, that unless a patient has the opportunity to talk about that, it might not even happen. If they're a patient under your care, that might be an easier, more accessible thing. But for patient empowerment, we might want to guide the kids back to suggesting something like this and helping to make it happen and sharing their voice. And Olivia, your experience too, I think that could be really helpful and interesting in sharing, what you're personally seeing and going through. And if that meeting of the minds, if you will, comes together and helps to provide better information, then that's a great thing to share, how this could actually help others.
Yeah. It is going to take more time, obviously, for the doctors because it's an extra clinic, so to speak. But I think that the dividend or the reward is very high. I mean, you learn, you help a family. It's well worth the time, and it makes you a better doctor, I think, to go through that. And we have it right now once a month. My dream and vision is that it'll be one eye clinic every day at my hospital that people rotate through. And also different doctors, it's not just that they're bringing their expertise in their field, but a lot of doctors think differently from each other. Some doctors rely a lot on tests. Other doctors want to just think about the kids more and try to figure it out without the lab test. And they use the lab test as a way to confirm or reject a theory. But we all practice very differently, So it's good to learn not just about other fields, but about how doctors think, One of my favorite topics is how doctors think, why we're wrong so often. We have a lot of biases, So by having a group, you kind of neutralize each other's weaknesses in how we think, and you fortify the collective strengths of how everyone thinks. So it's the benefit is just, so many. So I'm trying to, I'm hoping that this will catch on and then people will be part of it more and more. And other hospitals should try it too. And the parents appreciate it so much. They can't believe that my last patient I presented couldn't believe that I had 7 doctors or 6 doctors and including non-clinicians. My data science team was also part of that, trying to figure this out. And, the data scientist, came to the clinic and volunteered his own time to try to help me figure it out. That was so moving for me. I didn't ask him to do anything, just come and observe. But he said, let me help. I think I can do a couple of things to help you. And let me just go, mine the literature and see if we can come up with something. And he said, I want to help this family. And, I underestimated the power of, and he didn't even meet this family because we decided just to talk about it. Can you imagine if they meet the family? It's like, eye to eye with a family in need. And a lot of people would want to help. So who are not doctors, but they can help in other ways.
That's terrific. I have goosebumps in thinking about how this could really change outcomes for a lot of kiddos that are living with complicated, things, especially, my thought goes immediately to the ones that have maybe the clustering of conditions that appear like autoimmune. You get one and then you get many more. And so this is a very interesting thing and very, very cool. And it came out of our discussion today. How cool is that?
Yeah, that's right.
I thought maybe Savika and Olivia, do you guys want to talk a little bit about what you might personally want to know from Dr. Chang? Do you want to ask some questions about, I know you're both seniors and you're thinking about college and pursuing your general credits right now, but that will lead to your pre-med if you choose that pathway. Do you have any questions? Or this is kind of a fun thing because it is such a small group and it's so intimate. You can ask some really great questions if you like, and all questions are good.
I can start. So I had more of a general question, like in the future almost. So as a physician, I was recently just reading a book about elderly care and like the whole process of aging and accepting that like one day we all have to die eventually. So as a physician, how do you treat like your elderly patients and how do you help them accept that like at a certain point they can't have the life that they used to have?
I think again, it comes down to, for me, a relatively basic but elegant sort of answer, which is I treat them like they were my father or my mother. I nursed my father through a difficult, final couple of years before he passed. And I think you just kind of translate that into taking care of older patients. I do see adult patients, but I don't have too many adult patients in sort of their last leg of the journey. But I deal with something that may be even harder, which is dealing with children that are dying. And I know that, they're, but I'm always honest with the families and children, at least. The common question is, when are children ready to tell you that they want to know about death and what their understanding is? And I don't think there's a chronological age you should base that decision on. I think you should know the patient better, so if you know they're ready, or it's just too intimidating a topic. Most of the times the parents hold their children back. Most of the time, it's not the children. I remember a very good example of a child that was 10 or 11 with cystic fibrosis who was dying. And the parents always begged me. I was the resident on the case, pediatric resident. And the parents always begged me not to talk about dying and death with this person, with this patient. And one time, I had to put in yet another IV in her because she wasn't keeping her IVs in. And so she and I were alone in the room, and to add more drama, it was like dark except the light that I was using to put in the IV. And she was probably within a month or two of dying. And she said to me, Dr. Chang, can you talk to my parents about losing and that I'm going to die soon, because I don't think they're handling this very well. It's like she was the bravest by far of the whole family. Like, can you just deal with my parents? They're not handling this well. And I don't want to die knowing that they're going to be in pieces longer than they have to. Her basic point was just, can you deal with my parents and let them know that I know about dying. I know that this is a final thing and that you're gone. And, she understood everything about death, more than some adults, I might add. So, and she was like 10 or 11, and we don't give kids credit enough sometimes about how much they know. And I think some parents are maybe a little bit misdirected when they think that by not talking about death, that they're protecting their children. But I think it's the opposite. By not talking about it, you're actually subjecting them to misconceptions about death. I think and have parents not giving me the opportunity to talk about death with their children that are like 18, 19, 20, and will not let me talk to them about death. And I will push them until they give me the opportunity. And most will give in once I explain to them, this is for their benefit. I mean, how can you have an 18-year-old just not talk about death at all, and it's coming up real so fast. And but once I build a relationship with the parents to allow them to think that this is for them and for their child, they eventually will agree that I'm like a family advocate. I advocate their child just like I advocate the parents. but you have to build that trust. They have to trust you. I'm fortunate that most families really trust me to that degree, will change their mind. And also, when I lose a child in the family, I feel very honored, and I feel like I've done a good job when the family invite me to the funeral, and actually speak at the funeral most of the time. I try to keep it lighthearted. I make a joke on the expense of the parents, and then everyone will laugh, and I think everyone realized that it was a very special journey that they had with their child. But some doctors will not go to a funeral, and they say, no, that's crossing the line. I'm not going there. It's too much. But I feel like it's a special honor that you get that opportunity to. Usually when I go, they always want me to say something, I'm like the guest of honor, which is really incredible to me. At that painful moment, they can still remember me as an important part of their family, is really touching and really meaningful for me. And I always go. No matter what, I'll change my schedule to make it to the funeral. And this morning before I came on, a family texted me who wanted me to know that they're still thinking of me. Well, Matthew passed away in 1991. Can you imagine? 30 years ago now. 30 years ago, they lost their son, and she texted me and said, just thinking of you on this special day. Today is the day that he passed. And 30 years later, I'm still getting a text from them saying that they want to make sure I was okay, and they think of me on this day. And it just blows my mind 30 years later. My brother doesn't even text me every day. No, I just think it's amazing. And one of the 100 reasons why it's so great to be a doctor for your patients and families, it's just, the reward is just thousands fold more than the sacrifice you put in. And I'm so glad to see that more people are applying to medical schools than ever before. That warms my heart to see that. And to see people like you, even with the pandemic, for the first time putting doctors at risk. 10,000 or more healthcare workers have died since the pandemic started around the world. Probably more than 3,000 or 4,000 here in the US alone, including a lot of doctors. And yet, those of you who are thinking about it still want to do it. It's like, okay, it's a risk for me, but the privilege of helping people and saving lives is far outweighs the risk, right? And the risk of not just having a bad infection, risk of dying now. And I think it's like, like the firemen and the policemen going up the towers on 9/11, right? They all knew that there was a high likelihood of dying, but they did it anyway, because I feel like not doing it is going to bother me the rest of my life. If I were them, or if I'm a doctor now, if I don't stay as a doctor, a lot of doctors are just retiring early. They just think it's too much for them, which I totally appreciate. But now I think not being a doctor now, to me, I would be bothered by that a lot more than being a doctor and possibly dying from taking care of my patients. So it's a sacrifice at the highest level, just like no different than, soldiers going to war, protecting their country, firemen going to a fire, trying to save lives. That's heroism is everywhere. It's just not publicized, enough. We talk about the bad news a lot on the news, and especially with the pandemic. It's almost like people are more fascinated about the vaccines and the mutations, and that gets all the airtime. There's very little airtime for all the healthcare workers that are risking their lives taking care of patients. Because after a while, people get fatigued from even good stories, right? They just, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, doctor saving lives. The 8 o'clock thing in New York when they used to bang on things to celebrate, I think that stopped. People get fatigued from even good news. It's almost like they rather hear the bad news because it's more sensational, and it's easier to sell bad news than good news. But for me, I don't, for whatever good I do, I don't need to have it publicized, because that's like a special reward for me personally. When I save a life, it's like I'll carry that memory forward forever to the day I die. So And that reward as you go into medicine, you'll have too. It's just like, getting a text 30 years later from a family, talk about the size of that reward, right? They're just still thinking of you 30 years later, that you're a special person in their lives at the time that their child died. It's just, to me, it's like, I don't deserve that kind of reward. And but it's very common to get that kind of reward. But it's all about giving also, right? You have to give that kind of effort to get that kind of reward. And I mean, I stayed overnight with that family sometimes in the hospital, even when I wasn't on call. So I think they remember that. I treated Matthew like he was my own son, even though I was very young at the time, relatively speaking. And I felt like I lost a son almost, not quite, the day he died. And when I went to the funeral, it's like, I remember giving him my personal goodbye is I give them, because most of them have heart disease. So I figure, well, when they die and they're getting buried, I want them to have a good heart for a change. So I actually buy a little crystal heart and I leave it in their coffin. To me, that's like a personal goodbye from their cardiologist, and that means a lot to me when I put it in the coffin. It's like, I feel like it's my last good thing I can do for them, for the patient and for the family. So, but it's not for everybody, that level of involvement and emotional outlay is not for everybody. Some doctors say, I need to draw a line somewhere, right? And I don't want to be that involved. And it's a personal choice. I think a lot of people in pediatrics would rather be more involved than less involved. So I go to some of the events are, happier too. I go to birthday parties. I go to patients' weddings now that I'm older, and I have patients that are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. I think a few are about to become a grandparent. It's so gratifying. The reward of being a clinician is so gratifying. I think one week in a clinician's life getting rewards like this is worth a lifetime of sacrifice to me. It's just amazing how much more we get back. Another funny story was I had about 10 years ago, I got an email from a mom and said, I won't use his last name, but Troy is about to graduate from high school. I said, wow, because I took care of him when he was a baby in Boston when I was at Boston Children's. I said, well, first of all, I can't believe that you still are keeping in touch with me. I'm so flattered. And he goes, well, I'm also contacting you because Troy's about to graduate from high school. And he gets a choice of meeting anyone in the world that he choose. And he came down to 2 people. And I said, I just imagine like sports celebrities, right? It's an 18-year-old boy, right? Or young man, I should say. He goes, well, one is Troy Eakins, the quarterback for the Dallas Cowboys, right? I don't follow football that much, but, and then as I'm reading this, and the other person's you, and he chose you. I said, personally, I would just go meet Troy Eakins. You can meet me anytime. I feel like a celebrity can arrange that. Well, what a great story, right? I'm sure Troy Eakins will say yes, right? And he says, no, we're going to pay for one trip. And then he chose you. He wants to come see you and spend a day with you, just hang out with you. It's like a little buddy kind of situation. And I said, you know what? Save the money. I will come to you. You don't have to come all the way out to, I don't remember where I was. I think it was in Texas at the time. I said, go meet Troy Eakins. I mean, he can have both. I mean, if he can't decide, and he finally decided, for me, I'm just so flattered, so the funny part of that story is like a few years later, I was having dinner with my brother at the Four Seasons. Yeah, the Four Seasons in Palo Alto in the Bay Area. And guess who was sitting at the bar? Troy Eakins. Is it Troy Eakins or the Dallas quarterback?
Troy Eakins, and he was the quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys for many years.
For a long time.
Yeah, I don't follow it either, but that name, and I can just imagine what he looks like with the star on his jersey. And
yeah. So he was sitting at the bar with a colleague, I guess a newscaster. I think it was a sports newscaster. I think they were just having a drink.
Yeah.
Oh, and I walked off him and I said, Troy, you have no idea how we're tied together. And I kind of briefly told him the story, and he said, well, I would go see you and not me if I were that kid. So it was like a wonderful like slice of life. You know, he said, if I were that kid, I wouldn't want to come see me. I would definitely go see my doctor hero, you know. So because I had to do CPR and try at one point to save his life, but he said I wouldn't. I said I'm like nobody compared to you as a hero, you know. So we were just joking around about that.
Yeah. That is perfect, and that's a perfect way to summarize today and lead us into Super Bowl weekend. I think that's on Sunday, tomorrow. Yeah. So this is like the best story ever. Olivia, I did want to give you, we're a little over time, but did you have any questions you wanted?
No, I'm all set.
You're good? Okay.
Yeah, it was a really good session. Thank you for talking about all of your awesome insights about medicine.
Yeah, anytime. I'm happy to share one of my biggest passions, as you know, is help young people on their way and create a great world for them to enjoy medicine. And I'm working hard on the artificial intelligence, as you know. So I think neurology for Sarika is a great field right now because of all the interest and rewards that artificial intelligence is going to give us in the next decade or two. So I would Dr. Terman, my counterpart for the summer internship program, would be smiling right now if I said, yeah, neurology is a good field. Even though I'm a cardiologist, I'm learning more and more about neurosciences because of artificial intelligence, which I think will be huge in medicine. So
that is huge. That is awesome. One, I just want to bring up, I'm trying to pull it up on my phone here. It looks like our next Ask the Experts is coming up for March. So we invite you and everyone else to come back and join us. And we're going to be talking about clinical trial terminology. So we may hopefully have another speaker with you, Dr. Chang. I know we're trying to see which experts we have in the field along with yourself. Yeah. And then just start thinking about it, ladies, if you want to pull your questions or think about things you want to know, things that you would like to have more explained. And Savika, I know you're newer to iCAN, so feel free to bring a friend. You know, invite somebody to Zoom in with you. I know it's been a little difficult with everyone quarantining, but you are more than welcome to have others join in with you and share. And Savika is from Connecticut, and Livy, you're in Michigan, but feel free to reach out. You have everyone's contact information. So, you know, if you're thinking about something later and you want to know, you know, send a question in and we'll make sure it gets answered.
Yeah. Very good. And please stay healthy and safe. All right, everybody.
Yes, we're very hopeful for this. And you know, my personal plug is get your vaccine. I've had my first one. Olivia, you had your first one.
Yeah.
And I know it's slowly rolling out across the country. So
yeah, it's our best hope. It's not the ideal solution, but it's definitely our best hope.
That's right. I agree completely. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.